meet my bride. Let's go for a ride in my newfangled automobile. Just where we will go, nobody knows, but it's sure a great way to feel. Behind the wheel of the speed meter steel, it's my newfangled automobile.
Hello and welcome to Vintage Car History. I'm Wild Bill. Jay Leno has famously said regarding early car history that Germany was the birthplace of the car, but France was the nursery. However, when it comes to armored cars, Britain was the birthplace, but it was again France that was the nursery. Mere months after the armored car of Frederick Simms debuted, a rival armored car came from France. Built by three Frenchmen, this series of armored cars would be developed and produced for almost a decade. The three Frenchmen were, please forgive my bad pronunciation, Fernand Chiron, Léonce Giraud, and Émile Voix. All of these men were champion bicycle racers, friends, and some had connections in the automotive industry. They partnered up in early 1901 and established CGV as their company make, though they were also referred to simply as Chiron. Their first production cars, available later that same year, boasted four-cylinder 3.3-liter engines of about 15 to 20 horsepower, three-speed with chain drive. They were solid mid-market French cars at the time. Here's where things get a bit hazy. It is beyond dispute that Frederick Simms received his British patent for his war car in 1898. He did sign a contract to produce his car for the British Army by late 1899, but he did not actually present the car ready to be tested by the Army until 1902. The contracting partner for the build was Vickers. What is not beyond dispute is just how much these three French guys actually knew about the Simms war car project. Historians do not agree on this point, and to date I'm not aware of any irrefutable evidence coming forth, so I'll toss my opinion out there. I'd wager that they knew something about it. All of them were champion cyclists before getting into cars, and all of them had raced in England. This would eventually put any of them in contact with Harry Lawson, which would also eventually lead to meeting Edward Pennington, the man that inspired Simms and was well known for his inability to keep his mouth shut. Also, they would all have known Simms himself, especially Chiron, with him winning the first Gordon Bennett Cup. It is known that Simms and Chiron were friends by 1900, and Simms was in the throes of problems with his war car. True, there is no written record that they talked about it, but any of them, and Chiron in particular, Simms may have confided in. So I can't prove that they knew about it, and I don't know of any historian that can. If you do, hey, let me know about it in the comments. But anywho, they came up with a design for and produced an armored car that somehow addressed many of the shortcomings of the Simms machine, and only a few months later. I wonder. Arriving on the showroom floor in late 1902, the 1902 CGV Armored Car took a very different approach to the concept. The car itself was a conventional car, as opposed to being a very unusual mechanical contraption. It's true that none of these three men were engineers themselves, so they brought on a designer, Mikhail Noxodisi, a native of Georgia. He also had a few connections within the Tsar's army, and some interest in an armored car was expressed by them. The idea was simple. Take the already production 15-horsepower touring car, beef up the suspension, and put some armor and a gun mount in the back. Otherwise, it's just a car like any other. Working with Hotchkiss, a turret was welded onto the car, surrounded by 7 millimeters of armor. For the gun, a Hotchkiss was mounted, of course, 8mm machine gun firing 600 rounds a minute. About 2,500 rounds could be carried aboard. The car was presented at the Car and Bike Show in Paris in November of 1902, and its introduction was inauspicious at best. The show as a whole wasn't about military stuff, and so the car didn't get a lot of press. But what press it did get was favorable. The car was only armored for the gunner position in the rear. The driver and passenger, if any, were out in the open, just like the production car it was based on. The car went to the French Army and underwent trials in 1903. Being an actual car, It was fairly fast, able to reach 30 plus miles an hour on reasonable roads, and could fire while on the move reasonably accurately. On the other hand, it was expensive, and when its actual capabilities were considered, the actual uses for the car were fairly limited. After their test, the conclusion was that it would be perhaps good for transporting staff officers on and off the battlefield, but as a fighting vehicle, it was more trouble than it was worth. The idea did not go away. Hotchkiss continued to work with CGV, developing new models over the next few years. And indeed, some of these cars were produced and sold to other nations. The Ottoman, Spanish, and German armies all purchased CGV armored cars, making CGV the first company to offer armored and armed cars for sale. None of these early CGV cars ever saw actual combat, but much was learned about armored cars through their development, making France the nursery of the armored car. Thanks for watching Vintage Car History, and we'll see you next week. Peace.